Hi, guys. Welcome to Dead by Tomorrow Interviews. My name is Daniel Winter, and my co host is Andrew Monroe. As we explore different topics that are worth thinking about today, we want to bring in guests to share their own unique perspective. We hope you enjoy hearing from our guests as much as we enjoy talking to them. Welcome back. This is Daniel, not your normal introducing host. And so this time around, we have got a special guest coming on, Cedric Harris, which Andrew and I now have realized that Cedric is the third Harris in a row that we've interviewed. So I don't know what's going on there. We may have to rename the podcast, I don't know, like Daniel, Andrew, and the Harris clan. Cedric is an old friend of mine. We worked together at Compass/Alight for several years, are both big basketball enthusiasts. So we're making the sacrifice right now to talk together on the podcast, despite the Mavs being in Game 7 of the playoffs. And that's just because we're really committed to you guys and this podcast. And so, Cedric, really excited to have you on in honor of something that I know you and I share, which is listening to basketball podcasts. I'm going to ask you a question to start out that it's a little bit of a tribute to some of the podcasts we listen to, and it's a little bit of a callback to our work history. So when you were working at Compass and you first got off of lead approvals and you were doing work on your own, who was the first communicator to just bust your butt, to really let you have it?
First, thank you all for inviting me on. Definitely an honor. I've listened to several episodes and you've had a lot of great guests such as writers, engineers, doctors. So I was wondering why you all chose me to be a guest, but nonetheless, definitely a big honor. But to answer your question, the first communicator that really got me was Elizabeth Buchanan. She just really, she was hard, but it made me better. So for those that don't know, Daniel was my very first boss at this job. So not only did we work together, but he's also the person that was responsible for teaching me the trade and also the person responsible for, making me better. And throughout the process, there is a system of checks and balances. So when you're doing work and doing some research to get the information out to the clients, to the members, before it goes out to the client, there's a person called the communicator who looks over it to make sure everything is right before they send it. The person I'm referring to, EB, is what we call her. She did this to everyone, so I couldn't even take it personally. She was notorious and known for sending things back, or what do you call info researching, and that's when something's really off and you get a good old info research and you don't feel good about it at all. But that's the first person who really got me. But couldn't hold any grudges because every time she was right and I was wrong. So just part of the trade.
Yeah, no doubt. Shout out to EB, wherever you're at, helping those Sarasota members back in the day. But yeah, it was a pleasure having you on my team, Cedric. I remember I had both you and Surya as y'all were a couple of my first health pros. And I think we had the best team, probably like the nicest team of all time. It was just a lot of fun working together, seeing you grow, and ultimately you had the chance to move into becoming a senior, kind of training people on your own, and then now you're actually in a different career, have kind of made that jump and that move. So do you want to talk about what you've been doing lately, what it's been like to hop over and change careers?
Yeah, for sure. So I was at Compass for 4.5 years. So 2 years I was a health pro, so the role that I started in. And then after 2 years, I was promoted to become a senior. So that's what Daniel was when I first started. So I had my own team, was able to help mold them and help them grow as well. And then just a few months ago, so starting March 1st, was actually the first time I actually jumped careers and went to a new job. So right now I work for an insurance broker. Essentially what I do and what the company does, you get benefits through your employer. But we're responsible for helping put some of those benefit packages together, whether it be your medical, dental, vision, long-term disability, things of that nature. And we work with different clients in many different industries to do so. We help them budget. We help figure out what's important to them, what benefits they would like for their employees. And then based upon some of their needs, their culture, some of their pain points, we'll help put together a package of benefits at a good price point for them, good hopefully experience for the employees themselves. And then we'll help monitor that throughout the year. We'll check the budget. We'll see if there are any ongoing trends, throughout the process that will help improve the experience. And then if something wasn't a hit, something just really didn't work out, we'll go to market and try to find another vendor or another party that'll make the experience better for the employees and also the employer overall. So started that March 1st, and it's definitely been an adjustment. I was super comfortable at my old job, I felt like really ingrained in the culture. But starting a job in the middle of a pandemic, a lot of people lost their jobs and things of that nature. But to be able to start a new job in the middle of a pandemic and also be completely remote is something that's been an adjustment. Not meeting any of my coworkers, been there for 3 months, haven't met any of them, and just doing all the training remotely and things like that has been definitely an adjustment. But I feel like when you have those situations in which you are uncomfortable, or it may be a little bit out of your comfort zone, those are the situations in which you typically learn the most and also grow the most. So although it's been an adjustment, also been a change, learning a new industry or a different part of the industry, and then doing that remotely, it's definitely been something where I've learned a lot in the last 3 months, and I plan to continue to do so.
That is pretty cool. When you're talking about these adjustments, and change is difficult, right? Adjusting to a new lifestyle is difficult. Are you actively keeping that in your mind, saying, hey, this is worth it because I am getting a better experience, I'm learning new stuff? Or are there days, and I'm sure there are days, but how do you fight those days where it's kind of a drag? Like, man, I wish I just had that easy job. I wish I was back to being really comfortable. Like, how do you get past that and stay excited about all these new changes that are probably more stressful than not?
Yeah, for sure. There are stressful days, definitely frustrating days. But throughout that, I just think about different times in my life when I've kind of experienced another change or another transition. So starting at my old job at Compass, that was a transition within itself. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. So moving 10 hours away to Dallas, Texas, where I essentially knew no one, starting a job where I also knew no one, and then learning a job where I didn't know the industry that well. That was also an overwhelming time trying to get acclimated to working full time for the first time ever out of college, getting adjusted to just staying awake for working 40 hours a week. So I think back to those times in which I did have frustrating days, long days, and kind of question like, was this really worth it? But then I think about the other end of that when I got out of those times. So I just think about the times in which, although they were difficult, if you look at what you went through into where you got to, I think it always weighs out on the better end. So I just think about on those harder days with my new job, another transition period of, okay, I did go through some tough times previously, just training, learning, things like that. I made it out okay. And instead of just surviving, I ended up thriving. So I try to look at those old times. That helps reassure me that everything will be okay. And sooner or later, once again, I will thrive.
That is such a great mindset. You do your day job like you're talking about, and it's already pretty mentally time consuming. But also, we haven't mentioned this, but you have your own podcast, The Invited. How has that been, hosting a podcast and all the lots of work that goes into it, compared with you having these status changes in your work life and lifestyle changes? What's that like? And tell us a little bit about the podcast as well, because that's always fun to talk about people's side hustles.
Yeah. So, like you said, it is a lot of work. And I didn't really anticipate that when I started the podcast. So, like you said, the podcast is called The Invited. And we recently just finished up our first season. So, episode 1 came out in February. And then we wrapped up episode 9, the season finale, as you will, in April. And we're actually starting to strategize for season 2 and what we want to bring from that. But the whole premise of the podcast is similar to you all, we have guests on, and we really like to highlight our guests. So we want to highlight those people who have really cool careers, really cool businesses, make a huge impact in the community. Because I saw, and I'm sure you all see this as well, you get on Facebook or you get on LinkedIn, and you'll see someone you went to high school with, went to college with, and you're like, wow. You'll see like a new title, and you're like, oh, how did they do that? Like, how did they get there? Like, I have a guy that I went to college with, and he works for BuzzFeed. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Or another guy that I went to high school with and college with, he's an engineer. So he made lawnmowers that can essentially drive themselves. And they're smart enough to know when they're like off track or when there's uneven part of the grass, things like that. So I was like, wow, that's really cool. And the whole premise or the whole origin of it is no one's talking about this. No one really sees they only see the finish line. They only see the finished product, but they don't see a lot of the hard work that goes into it. But also, they really don't see essentially why someone does what they do. The podcast is to highlight those individuals, but also use that platform as a resource for others who may want to embark on a similar journey, but might not know how to get started. Simply just listening to someone may be able to jumpstart an idea, get you started on the right track, and then also be able to help you follow your own cloud essentially and blaze your own trail. So that's the premise of the podcast. We've had a lot of different guests in different industries across the board. But like you said, it is a challenge also, because the first episode of the podcast actually came out on the last day of my old job. So it was a start into an era, but a start to a new era. And with starting a new job, but also starting a podcast, it was like a lot of time management for sure. I feel like I was working 2 jobs and trying to figure out both of them at the same time. So as you all know, starting a podcast, it seems cool. It is cool. But also there's a lot of trial and error with it. We were just talking about before we hopped on, whether it be sound or kind of the execution or what you want to talk about, how to get guests, things like that. It's definitely been a challenge, but I feel like the reward is so much, outweighs the challenge so much. I've learned so much from all the different people that we've had on. And it's really fun, really, get to talk about a lot of different topics. And me, myself, I never really saw myself as a really creative person. People that can really paint well, sing well, or people that are just monster athletes. And I didn't fit into any of those buckets. But with the podcast, I feel like it gives me an opportunity to express myself and express some sort of creativity, although it's not in the traditional things that we grew up learning were talents or things that you saw as creative. I think it's given me my own path essentially to flex some of my skills and also just have a little bit of fun on the side.
Yeah, and what Cedric hasn't shared is we kind of have a rule at Alight that there can only be one podcasting employee at a time. So that's the reason why that was on his last day and he had to make that move. I mean, props to you for making that sacrifice. No, that's not true at all. But I love what you said about how you beforehand didn't view yourself necessarily as a creative individual and maybe didn't fall into some of those stereotypical buckets of what people would say is like creativity, but the podcast really does bring out skills that you have and really a creative side to you. I can completely relate, would not call myself a creative individual, but the podcast really does provide opportunity to kind of step out in that way. And I definitely see that as a strength of yours. To this day, Cedric, I think you are known for having one of the best senior interviews of all time, of all people, because you're just somebody that really speaks well. You communicate well, especially when you're sitting and you're talking to somebody, whether there's a microphone or not, and just kind of asking questions. And I just love the message of your podcast, which is so much focused on, all right, yeah, like you see what it takes to sort of get here, but let me give you that perspective on, or sorry, you see what it takes. You see where somebody is at the finish line, but you don't always see what it takes to get there. So let me give you that perspective. And, you may not want to hear this, but I think you still have a lot of the light values ingrained in your brain, talking about how you didn't just survive, you thrive. That's such a buzzword. And you do just such a great job of kind of giving that perspective, which again, that's what made you a great leader at the company. And so something for you that I see that I think is just an amazing quality. And, I see the finished product, but I'm curious where that came from, is you have such high integrity. I've always had a lot of respect for the way that you go about your work, the way that you hold yourself, the way that you communicate. And so where does that come from? How was that developed? Where did this just high integrity character come from?
Yeah, well, thanks for the kind words for sure. But I feel like a lot of the integrity comes from just the way I was raised. So my parents also always held me to a really high standard, whether it be schoolwork or sports or whatever the case may be, any extracurriculars, of just making sure you do your best at all times. One, also, I'm a terrible liar. If there was a time for me or opportunity to try to lie or get out of something or not do my best, one, I'm not good at that. I get caught very quickly and you can call my bluff really quickly. But then also, I just feel like I just had a feeling in me that I would feel bad that I would let someone down. So that's one part of it. Another part I would say probably is like my faith. I do identify as a Christian. I love Jesus, all that good stuff. So whenever I did do anything bad, I always felt like God was like watching me, like looking down at me. Is like, why did you do that? You knew better, even at a very young age. I think a lot of that has to do with growing up and learning about, faith and morals and the way to do things right and the right things to go about things. But also just putting yourself in someone else's shoes. If this were to happen to me, how would I feel? if I were to do this thing, and whether it be like, let's say at work, not meeting a deadline that is needs to be made with another person that you're working with, just because you don't feel like doing it, or just because it may be difficult or tough, I wouldn't want someone to let me down. So I'm not going to let someone else down, even if it takes a little bit of extra work, even if I have to, go out of my way to help someone else. I think going the extra mile, goes a long way, essentially. And I think that's the kind of impact that I want to make. Just people knowing that I can be counted on, people knowing that I can be trusted, people knowing that I'm in their corner. Those are the reasons why you say I have high integrity. And those are the reasons why I continue to do what I do and trying to, just help everyone out and just be a team player, essentially.
Okay, I'm going to be a little selfish here. I have been thinking very strongly about values this last week, just a weird coincidence. And integrity is one of the ones that I thought of. So what a lot of people think of when they talk about integrity is honesty or like truth and that kind of stuff. But it really is what you're talking about, where you're not just being honest, because you can be honest and also hurt people. You can be honest and not care about what happens to other people. I think that's a very important distinction and a really interesting value. And I think Daniel actually shares a lot with that on there as well. So all three of us probably at least try to focus on that as a value. But that said, I love what you talked about. It is so much fun learning from people who come onto these things. And that's the whole goal, to steal some wisdom from you. What goes along with your integrity? What are some of the values that you see in your life that you're like, hey, this pairs with who I want to be as a person? And then let me stack a question on with that. And when you're following those values, when you have high integrity and whatever else you want to say that you believe in on your value side, what do you do with it? Why do you do it? Is there a goal in mind, or is it just you want to make a certain impact in your life? What brings you down that path?
Great question. So some of the things that I value are some of the things that I try to live by. Like you said, one, honesty. Two, I would probably say just being reliable. And I think that's really important, because someone can be there for you at one point in time, but then another time they might not be able to. So I think in my friend group or my family, I think me being reliable is something that everyone kind of sees in me. I'm kind of like a go-to person. If someone needs help, someone has a flat tire, I've gotten many of those calls. And I think with doing that one in particular, I think I'll just go one by one. I think by doing that one in particular, that one for me, I want to do it because I think that if I am reliable, that people will essentially always come to me. And that's like a relationship builder. And with me, I really value relationships with people, with family, friends, and I always love maintaining relationships. So being reliable, being a good friend, a good family member is something that I really, strive for. And being reliable in those situations is something that can help enhance those relationships, but also maintain them. So that's one thing that I definitely want to try to do, is just being reliable. Another thing I've loved to do, something that I value, is one, just being compassionate. So a lot of times people will come to me and, share stories, or they may be going through something, or they may be, having a hard time. So one, not to judge someone because of what they're doing or some of the decisions they made to get them in those situations, but to empathize and show compassion is something that I always try to do. One, because we're all not perfect. So no one's perfect. We've all made bad decisions. We've all made mistakes, and we've all essentially not been where we want to be in a point in time. So by showing compassion to someone during those times is something that can help get them out of those times, being a good listener, being a good friend. And then by not judging them, but trying to uplift them is something that can really go a long way, and something that they'll always remember. So if you are compassionate to someone, they're more likely to be compassionate to someone else. And then they're more likely to be compassionate to someone else because of the good experience they had from day one with just reaching out and receiving compassion. So that's another value that I try to live by, just being compassionate and just making sure that I'm a good person. And I was wanting to say probably the third one that I probably try to just live by, a good value, is essentially just, like you said, honesty is another one. So I did read a book last year called The Four Agreements, a really popular book. And one of the agreements, the first one, is actually to be impeccable with your word. And I think that's really important because, especially in this day of age with social media and, everyone having a voice, which they should, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of essentially shaping your narrative, which is good to have your own voice, be able to tell your own story. But to be able to tell that with, the high integrity or being impeccable with your word, I think is really important, because if people can trust your word, they can definitely trust you. And then with what you're saying, if people can listen to you and trust you, you can reach an audience that you probably wouldn't have reached before. And so you all probably experienced this a lot with the podcast and just speaking with a lot of different people. You've probably realized how important words and the way you say things really impact people. And you've probably heard it from listening to people like, wow, they're really articulate. They really mean what they say. And I really want to find out more about that person. And so I'm sure it's been the other ways, like you've had listeners where they don't know much maybe about Daniel, but they know a lot about Andrew, or vice versa. And just by the way you all speak, it makes them a fan of yours, and it makes them want to continue to learn more about you. And then you continue to pass your message along, whatever that may be. So just being impeccable with your word is something that I think goes a long way, and something I always try to do.
And you just dropped so much knowledge. There's so many different directions that I feel like I sort of want to go. And so, I mean, we may circle back a couple times on some of the things you said, but there are a couple immediate things that jumped out to me, at least, that maybe won't jump out to all of the audience members, but just cool connections that I think of from some past episodes. And so you talked about how when you are operating within compassion and are trying to, build somebody up, and just this idea that if you can do that for one, then they sort of pass that on to the others. I think about some studies that have really shown that the way that you hold yourself and the way that you live your life really does pass on to those that are closest to you, and then it passes on further. So a lot of the studies have actually been around obesity. And so if you have a friend that's obese, it actually increases the likelihood that you are obese. And then there have been a couple of, not as many studies, but some others talking about happiness as well. If you have a happy friend, then you tend to be a little bit happier. And I think that's just such a cool way to think about things. And again, just being mindful of the impacts that you have and how it can spread beyond your circle of influence. Because circles of influence is another just really important thing, especially in today's like social media culture, where there's so much happening in the world. We feel this onus to do things about it, but it's kind of this question of how much can you really do? And at the end of the day, what you can do is you can show compassion to the people closest to you. You can listen to the people closest to you. You can seek to understand the people closest to you. And that does have that sort of ripple effect, which is just so valuable and so important. And then the idea of your word and being impeccable in your word. If we go back to, I don't remember which class this was, but it talks about there sort of 3 different types of persuasive logic that exist. I think it's pathos, ethos, and logos. And I'm going to probably have to Google this to fact check myself, but I think ethos is the one that's very much tied to the character of the person sharing the message. And that's powerful, again, to just be mindful of that. If you are somebody who your word is impeccable, then you gain that sort of ethos persuasiveness in what you're saying. And then if you can pull in the pathos and the logos as well, that makes your message really impactful. So just a ton of gems in that. And one thing you mentioned is that this idea of having an impeccable word is something that you picked up from a book. I know you've been reading a whole lot in COVID times. What have been some of the most meaningful books that you've read, and what have been some of the ways you've sort of changed from that?
Growing up, I was always a big reader, like in high school, middle school, but then moving into college and then also moving into just adulthood, those transitions, you kind of, well, for me anyway, I kind of lost the time or didn't prioritize the time to read just for leisure. But like we all know, COVID was a big impact to a lot of us. So March of 2020, it was just like, what am I going to do now to fill up a lot of my time? I no longer have a commute to work, no longer can go to like dinner or anything or happy hour, whatever the case may be. What is the best way to use my time to where I can be productive? So picked up reading again. And it's kind of funny because the first book that I read last year was a book by Dave Ramsey called Financial Peace. And my brother had given it to me in 2016. It was like, hey, you should read this to be on top of your finances, to build wealth, all of those things. And just sat on my bookshelf for 4 years. And I finally picked it up and kind of went through it. And I started kind of listening to some of those principles and implementing some of those in my life. And the big thing about Dave Ramsey, he's a big person of having no debt. And then when you have no debt, then you can really use a lot of your income to start investing and building wealth and things of that nature. So I really took that to heart and started to implement those principles and do the snowball method to eliminate debt. And I paid off all of my student loans at the end of December of 2020. And that took about 4.5 years total. I paid off my car in April of 2021. And that was about 2 years and 3 months that I had that car. And so now I'm completely debt free and now working on, building wealth and things of that nature. So that was the first book I read last year. And it definitely had an impact on my life in that way with my finances and just prioritizing certain things so that way I can set myself up in a good place in the future. But from March of 2020 through December 2020, I ended up reading about 9 books. So almost like one a month. And I read a mix of fiction, mix of nonfiction. So Dave Ramsey, Financial Peace was definitely one it was a big takeaway for me. Probably the best nonfiction book that I read, or the one that I found the most interesting, was The Autobiography of Malcolm X. It's told by Alex Haley. And it's kind of random because you hear a lot about civil rights, and the person you hear about the most, of course, is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Definitely a great leader. And you always hear the name Malcolm X, but no one really talks about, him or anything that he's done. I really didn't know much about him, but a friend of mine, they had ordered the book, and then they actually ordered me the book as well. And we just read it together. And it was like a super impactful book because he went through multiple stages and multiple layers in his life. And I think that's really important because although you are who you are at a certain point in time, that doesn't mean that's who you have to be. So at a point in time, he was in prison. Before he's in prison, he was a gambler, a thief, a pimp, all these things, went to prison. And he actually picked up reading himself and started to get educated and became reformed in prison, and then came out with a lot of knowledge and then became the civil rights activist that we know today. But I think that's really important because a lot of times people kind of get stuck and kind of in a routine. It's okay, this is just who I am. This is what I do for work. This is what I always will be. And it's just the way, these are the cards that I was dealt. But that doesn't always have to be the case. If you want to do something different, or if you want to learn about something different, you just have to take the time to invest in yourself and then be able to pivot off of the things that you learned. So I think that story and just learning about him was super impactful in that way, as I feel like if you aren't growing, or if you're the same person that you are today that you were 10 years ago, I think a lot of growth has to happen, because I think we should all be changing and hopefully changing for the better. So I think that's one book that I definitely read that was really impactful. And on the fiction end, I wouldn't say it was like super impactful or anything, but it was just a super good read. It was a book called Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. It's kind of about, I love time travel movies, and it's kind of about time travel and, finding yourself and your identity. So if you just like a good science fiction book, a good time travel piece, I definitely recommend that one, because it kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time. I probably read it in about a week just because it was just so interesting, so good. It really kept me intrigued. But I've listened to several episodes of your podcast, so I've been writing down a lot of the book recommendations that a lot of your guests have been dropping. So it's funny because a lot of people like reading, and so my recommended book list just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So now I just have to keep carving out more and more time to knock out a lot of those books and be able to talk about the things I learned from the recommendations I continue to get from friends, podcasts, TV, all that good stuff. So definitely a great use of time, but still have to, as things are opening back up and we're coming to this new normal, as we call it, I have to continue to make sure that I prioritize the time to read, because I really do enjoy it and I really find it impactful and I can really learn a lot, and I have learned a lot.
Dang it, Cedric. Congratulations first on the debt. That is freaking huge, dude. I love that. That was a whole lot of stuff for me to jump off of, and I can't do all that at once.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I rambled, went down a little rabbit hole a little bit, but thank you. It was definitely a big achievement for me as far as the debt part. But yeah, we can take this wherever y'all want to take it.
That is wild, dude. And just to shout out there, I loved Dark Matter. It is a cool book, and that is why I like fiction like that. It makes you think, and
Yes.
it raises questions that are hard to do in a nonfiction setting that are still important for, introspection and learning and all that kind of stuff. And it's just, you couldn't do Dark Matter talking about hey, this is a nonfiction book, and then have these kind of things, because you can't talk about stuff that hasn't happened yet by talking about things that have. So if we're to prepare for our futures and some of the choices that we're going to have to make fiction like that is just great. That's cool, man.
Yes, for sure. I was actually explaining that book to a friend of mine because I have a friend that I'm not going to read it, but I want to learn, I want to know about it. So, because you keep talking about it. So I broke down the entire book to him. He was like, wow, I see why books become movies because I would want to see that on screen. And I was like, me too. So maybe one day.
He's got a lot of books like that. I hope somebody starts picking him up and be like, hey, we're just going to make a whole universe of all of your books and all the cool stuff you do, because he does some really cool ones. Instead of addressing all of the cool things you talked about, because they're all really important, we're just going to tell everybody to go listen to your podcast and go learn about all those things from you, because that's really cool. Instead, let me shift you over to something I've been thinking about related to you. You're one of the few people we've had that have come on that is not a native-born Texan. What is that like, coming to Texas not as a Texan? Are we as crazy as everybody else in the U.S. thinks, or is it justified, the things we do and the things we say?
You all are definitely crazy. I'll start there. But yeah, I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, as previously mentioned. So what brought me to Dallas in the first place was actually Compass. So I went to the University of Missouri, and they were actually recruiting going to campus. And I interviewed still in Missouri, still in college, and I got the job and moved down to Texas. And have any of you all ever been to Missouri or St. Louis, Missouri at all?
I've been to Kansas City, Missouri, which I know doesn't actually count. So that's it for me.
Yeah, Kansas City and Columbia for me, never St. Louis.
Okay. Well, yeah, St. Louis is a cool place, but it doesn't have a lot to offer as far as, well, not as much to offer as Texas. So I would say Texas is a cool place because I've definitely met a lot of cool people here, done a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have done previously, and there are always something going on, different events and things of that nature. But at the same time, people in Texas love Texas. They love themselves, and they think that nothing else is better than Texas, which I don't know if that's true. Like, I didn't come from a super big city. Like, St. Louis is, I guess, a mid-sized city. So if I came from LA or New York or something like that, I would probably be like, these Texans are so full of themselves and they don't know what is outside the state of Texas. But coming from a smaller place and coming to Dallas, I definitely see the benefits of being a Texan. But as we can see with just the way in the pandemic and way in which Texas was a lot different than a lot of other different places. And even now, I mean, I don't think we ever really closed down that much. Like, people are still looking at us like we're crazy. I've had several family members like, are you all really out there just partying all the time? No mask, no nothing. I'm just like, I'm at home. I know people that do. I have friends that are out there, but I'm just relaxing. So it's definitely a world of its own. And I think I've kind of adopted that a little bit. Like, I've kind of started feeling myself as a Texan a little bit. So I might be crazy soon.
All right. I'm looking forward to you open, caring, or revolver. That's when you know you've made it.
I was going to say, when you say that Texas barbecue is better than barbecue up from the Kansas City area.
You're going to get us in trouble, Daniel.
I know that's a hot button item.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Like,
you're going to get Cedric in trouble is what I mean.
Like, it's good. I would say that, but it's nothing I've never had before. Like, it's not like a top tier. It's definitely good, but it's not like a top tier barbecue. I've been to places with a lot better barbecue, including Missouri. Memphis has pretty good barbecue. But if you ask anyone from here, especially Dallas, they've never had anything better than Pecan Lodge, which is good, but I don't know if it's the best.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I agree with you on that. I think the best barbecue I've had is probably a little bit closer to Austin. Pecan Lodge is good, but I need to try some of the Kansas City area because I've done Tennessee. Memphis is good. I think I like Texas a little bit better, but I got to broaden my horizons.
The great barbecue. We're just going to shift this whole podcast into a barbecue travel log.
I wouldn't be mad at that.
I wouldn't either. I get to drive around. That'd be cool. You guys let me know when you're ready. I hear Cedric has a paid off car, so he can drive, and I'll buy the barbecue. And, we'll see if we bring Daniel along or not. Okay, besides our barbecue journey, that'll create stories of its own down the road. But for now, one of my favorite things that we get to do at the end of the podcast is ask you if you have any stories. And it can be about us. It can be about you. It can be about people you don't know. So if there's anything that you've been waiting to tell that story and maybe you can't tell it on your own podcast because it's too inappropriate or something, I don't know. Let's hear what you got.
So this is something that actually happened to me last Friday, I want to say. I think
Ooh,
it's pretty
fresh.
cool. I think it's pretty cool because I'm a big basketball fan. As we talked about, the Mavericks are playing Game 7 right now against the Clippers. So don't know who's winning that one, but hopefully we do win. But I believe it was last Friday, either Game 3 or Game 4 of the series. Dallas Mavericks had a home game. And me and two buddies, we went to go watch the game in a sports bar in Uptown Dallas called Moxie's. So we're just there watching the game, hanging out. The game went off. The Mavericks lost, unfortunately. And they were just hanging out, just talking, catching up and everything. And then we're sitting toward the front of the restaurant. Next thing you know, it's two guys with gray sweatsuits on. And one is Terrence Mann, who plays for the LA Clippers. And then another one is DeMarcus Cousins, who also plays for the LA Clippers. So they're just coming in to get a bite to eat. Next thing you know, Marcus Morris, who also plays for LA Clippers, he comes in. And then Damon Jones, who's an assistant coach of the Clippers, he comes in. Yogi Ferrell, who's also he used to play for the Mavericks. He now plays for the Clippers. He comes in. So I'm like, wow, this is super cool. Just seeing all these athletes that are 7 feet tall, like right in front of me. I thought that was pretty cool to see how big they are, like in person, and just to be in the same, like they're just literally just grabbing a bite to eat after a win. I wish they would have lost, but hey, that's a different story. And then another player, the only player from the Mavericks that was in there was JJ Redick. He's actually injured right now, so not playing. But I'm a huge fan of his podcast. So he has a podcast called The Old Man of the Three, and they have all sorts of guests on there, from the guy who runs Disney to the executive producer of the Grammys to lots of different basketball players like Kevin Durant, Damian Lillard. So that's the only person that I actually went up to speak with, because I'm a huge fan of his pod and been a fan of him since he played at Duke. So we had a short exchange and just wished him good luck, wished him good health, and then just told him I was a huge fan of a podcast, and he's one of my podcast influencers. Like, as a host, I look at him and he's pretty cool. So I try to kind of model my host game after him, so to speak. And we did a little dap at the end, so I thought that was pretty cool.
That is awesome.
So jealous, man. That's amazing. That's such a good story. I mean, you even got to talk to Redick. That's cool. I mean, I hope he plays soon. I agree. Man, I'd be so starstruck. One, just like starstruck being around all those players, but two, like you said, those are just some big men. They're not only are they big men, they're big men that are more coordinated and athletic
Right.
than I am. And
yeah, so that was pretty cool. And it's funny because I guess it would have been, so recording this on a Sunday, so I guess this past Thursday, I had a friend that was in the same area. They were at the same sports bar, and they saw Leonard walk right past them. So I was like, wow, I was there at the wrong time. I could have met Kawhi. But I think all the players stay in the hotel that's connected to the sports bar. So they were probably just coming down from their room to get a bite to eat. But if you're looking to meet someone, I know like the friend that saw Kawhi, she's a woman, and she's like, I could have been a basketball wife if I would have known who that was. So if you're looking to be a basketball wife, or if you're just looking to meet some NBA players, let me know, and I'll point you in the right direction.
let me know. I want to be there. I want to be a basketball wife.
All right, gotcha. So hopefully the Mavericks make it to round 2, so that way there will be more home games in Dallas, so there will be more opportunity to see players from another team maybe. So we'll see.
Man, that's a great story. I love it. Okay, so in honor of basketball podcasts, one that you turned me on to that I've listened to quite a few episodes now is the Knuckleheads podcast. And one thing that they always ask their guests that I want to ask you is start, bench, cut. I think that's kind of a common maybe basketball question, but you're pulling for the Mavericks. You live in Dallas, which I appreciate, but I know that your true basketball love is the Lakers. So I'm going to ask a start, bench, cut with 3 Lakers players. And first one is, I know he's only been there a couple of years now, but LeBron.
Okay.
And then Kobe.
Okay.
And then Kareem.
Ooh, okay. So the reason I am a Lakers fan is because Missouri, the entire state of Missouri, has no professional basketball teams. So I gravitated toward the game because my favorite player of all time is Kobe Bryant, the late great Kobe. So he's the reason that I'm a Lakers fan to begin with. And even in the rougher years when we weren't as good, or even after he retired, I had to keep the purple and gold on because that's what I grew up on. So I couldn't not start Kobe just because of that. So Kobe is going to get the starting position no matter what. And then the whole Bron and Kareem thing. Kareem retired before I was even born. So I never really got a chance to see him play. All the highlights, all I see is one shot, the sky hook. I've never seen him do anything else. So I know he's the NBA's all-time leading scorer. So I know he got buckets in different ways. But because I actually never saw him play, I'm going to have to cut him. And they were going to bench Bron because he's just not going to be Kobe in my opinion. But he did give the Lakers a championship last year, and he's obviously, people say he might be the best player ever. So we're going to start Kobe, bench LeBron, and Kareem has to go just off the fact that I never saw him play. I'm not old enough.
That's a respectable answer. I mean, it may be getting some of our older listeners like calling us nephews or whatever the lingo is. I hear people argue that Kareem should be the greatest of all time, kind of in there with LeBron and Michael. And I'm kind of in the same boat as you, that I never really saw him play. I think I saw him in the movie Airplane before I ever saw any basketball stuff. So yeah. I think I could have predicted that answer maybe.
Yeah, I mean, Kobe's the guy, and you have to roll with Kobe. But while we're on the topic of stories, I do have one more I want to share while we have some time before we get off the topic of stories. But it's a story involving Daniel. And one time, as your listeners probably know, you're like crazy athletic and do like crazy athletic things. So, you do your Spartan races. And so he recruited a bunch of guys from work, guys and girls from work, to help train for a Spartan race and maybe even participate. So I went to the trainings for the Spartan races. I didn't actually participate in one, but the training was super fun. And it really made me realize like how out of shape I was at the time and how in shape some people are. So one of the trainings actually involved us going to an obstacle warriors gym. And we actually saw a guy in there that was actually on American Ninja Warrior, I believe. So it had all these different things where, you run up the ramp, you do the little, testing upper body strength. Yeah, things like that. But there's one particular one where it was just, the straight up going up the rope climb. And we were, taking turns. There were 2 ropes. So we were competing against each other. So I was going against another one of our coworkers, shout out Zach Austin. And we were racing toward the top. And I was beating him the entire time. And Daniel, how high would you say the rope was?
Very high. It had to have been, I don't know, maybe 20 to 30 feet up at the top of it. It was up there.
Okay. So yeah, 20 or 30 feet up. So we're racing, and we've already been like working out at this point in time. So I'm beating him by a nice margin. But then at a point in time, I'm toward the top and I just get really tired. And then I'm like, okay, all I have to do is I'm close enough to where if I can just swing to hit the top, I'll hit it and I'll win. So I kept trying to swing instead of just doing the right thing and pulling myself up one more notch to hit the top. And then out of the corner of my eye, I see Zach. He's coming. He's not done. I thought I had him finished. He's not done. So I'm continually trying to swing. And one time I swing to try to hit the top, and then my hand that was grabbing the rope just let go of the rope, and I fell all the way to the bottom. Like all the way to the bottom. I landed on the mat, and I landed flat on my back. But shout out to the mat. I wasn't injured at all because it would have been a really nasty fall. So I popped right up. But the way that everyone looked at me when I popped up, you would have thought they saw a ghost. Because apparently it looked really bad from the people that were looking at the bottom. And they thought I was like going for it. They thought I was dead. Everyone was like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good." But apparently it looked really bad. And Zach actually won because he actually hit the top. So I did all that for nothing. But I thought that was a really cool story because it shows, how long I've known Daniel and some of the things that we, do for fun, just climbing ropes just for fun. But also the fall is kind of legendary. They still talk about it. They used to talk about it at work. Like every 6 months, somebody like, "Remember that time you fell? Or I heard you fell 3 years ago." And I'm like, "Yeah, I did. But I lived to tell the tale."
Yeah. And there are a few things that I'll add to the story from the perspective of somebody standing on the ground. And so, like you said, I got everybody together to kind of do this fun thing and train. And so I think if this was like a work event, it would have been under my purview. And so seeing you at the top, swinging to try to hit the bell, there's a part of me that was like really proud. Oh yeah, like Cedric is giving it all, like he's going to win this. And this is a good competition. But then there's a part of me that quickly realized like, holy crap, he could fall. And I don't know what's going to happen. Yes, there's a crash pad, but that's really high up there. And then when you fell, my stomach dropped. I was so worried for you. I was worried what like the repercussions were going to be. I was like, all of these coworkers are going to be here and witness me causing Cedric to die. And so I was so relieved when you got up. And Zach was also, very relieved, obviously, but it's just funny to me that he first made sure to get the bell and win
Right.
and come down and be like, "Hey man, you all right?" But that rope was no joke. I think Donovan, your roommate at the time, like lost pretty much all of the skin on his hands climbing up and down that rope.
Yeah, he wasn't smart. So he like wanted to get down, but didn't know how. So he just let the rope, like he just loosened his grip and just slid down the rope, but kept his hands firmly on the rope. And so,
Ow.
it looked bad. If you saw the pictures, you would think I don't know, you think like he got into a fire or something. Like all his skin on his fingers were bad. He said he had to type with gloves at work for the next week because his fingers hurt too bad. It was crazy. But nonetheless, we all survived, barely, I guess, but it was fun.
That is awesome. And I think the guy y'all saw was Karsten, I think is his name, because I too went to the gym with Daniel when we were training for the same race. And he made me realize how inadequate I was.
I think that's what like a lot of people, like a lot of professional athletes, no matter what the sport is, they make it look so easy that they make anyone think they can do it. But once you actually try and see what goes into it, you're like, there's a reason that I'm watching on a TV and they're actually doing it.
Yeah, it's a whole different level. I actually really don't like watching sports very much, and I'm finally getting to it because it is understanding like that. I just always had trouble understanding why what they were doing was interesting because they all look like they're the same level of athleticism. I was like, whatever. It's no different than watching something else, but it's not. They're monsters. It's wild.
Yes, indeed.
Cedric, we like to close off with a challenge. And if you've got one, we'd love to hear it.
Okay, cool. So I mentioned the 4 Agreements book by Don Miguel Ruiz earlier in the show. I mentioned the first agreement being impeccable with your word, but the second agreement and the third agreement are the two I found the most impactful. And essentially the second one and the third one there, don't take things personally and then don't make assumptions. So a lot of the problems that a lot of people have in life or a lot of the conflicts comes from those two things. If someone canceled on you for dinner or someone wasn't able to make your wedding, wherever the case may be, a lot of times we take those things personally and we think it's about something that we did or something like that. But a lot of times when dealing with people, a lot of times it just has to do with them. Maybe they, got a flat tire, whatever the case may be, and couldn't make it. So a lot of the times we take things personally with interactions with people, with coworkers, family, friends, loved ones, significant others, and that causes us to feel some sort of way. And then we may react based upon us taking it personally. But a lot of the times, if you don't take things personally, you have a higher likelihood of that not letting that bother you. And then you can remain in good spirits and you can continue on a positive track and then continue to interact with those people and not cut them off or cancel them or whatever the case may be. And to go along with that, not making assumptions, a lot of the times the things we take personally are because we made assumptions about what happened. So instead of asking someone like, oh, why weren't you able to make dinner? Or why did you do that? We just make assumptions about why they did these things. We create our own narratives in our head. And then because of that, we move a certain way or act a certain way based upon an assumption. So those two things together, I think, can really lead to less conflict with individuals, but also it just keeps you in better spirits. It's less things to worry about. I think your stress level goes down if you're not constantly creating narratives and worried about what other people may or may not think or may not be doing. And then because of that, you can continue to use that time, use that energy to focus on things that are important to you, focus on things that will help benefit you and others. And then you can still continue to maintain those relationships with those individuals or with those parties that if you didn't do that, you may have taken things personally, made assumptions, and might not be friends anymore, wherever the case may be. So I think those two things can definitely keep you in a good spirit. And like you said, you can be dead by tomorrow. So you want to make sure that what you're doing today leads to your best life. And I think those are two things that can, while you're living, can make sure you're quote unquote living your best life and living into the best of your ability. So I would like to challenge people to not take things personally and not make assumptions. I know it's hard. We all do it. It's kind of human nature, unfortunately. But if you just challenge yourself to take a step back, think about it, evaluate the situation, take some of those personal feelings out of it, some of those assumptions out of it, I think a lot of us would be better off.
That is a perfect challenge. I'm definitely going to be giving that a try because that is something that I am not great at. I assume a lot of malicious intent in my life. So thank you for that challenge. That's really good. And thank you for coming on, Cedric. We really appreciate you joining us. This has been a blast. And Daniel, thank you for letting me meet this wonderful compatriot of ours in the podcast world. And it has just been really cool having you on. To everybody listening, please go check out Cedric Harris's podcast, The Invited. It is a wonderful, educational, interesting interview format podcast. He has a lot of really cool people that do a lot of really cool things on it. Definitely give that a listen. It might even be better than ours, but Cedric's on there and he came to hang out with us, so we can't be too far behind him. Thank you guys for listening, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.